All right, hello, and thank you for joining us for our Financing Study Abroad 101 information session. This is presented through the UW-Milwaukee Center for International Education and the Office of Financial Aid Administration. My name is Mike Madaus. I'm one of the financial aid officers here at UWM. Just wanted to start our discussion today by letting you know it's never too early to start planning, regardless of when you're thinking of studying abroad. Even if it's a year or two down the road, it's always good to get the information as soon as you can ahead of time. As far as what we'll go through in this session today, we're going to discuss financial aid, how it works with study abroad, some specific grants and scholarships that pertain specifically to study abroad programs like the Wisconsin Study Abroad Grant. We'll discuss how study abroad cost and budgets work, also how study abroad fees post on your account, what it means when you go through with your study abroad confirmation, um, go over some other helpful forms and funding ideas that may come up as well for you. The very first step when I'm looking for funding for your study abroad program, very basic, is we recommend fill out that FAFSA for the year, the free application for federal student aid. That can be done at fafsa.gov as listed here on the website. That would basically be your application for any federal aid. A lot of the state grants and things of that nature are tied to the FAFSA, as well as some scholarship resources we'll see as well. So that's always a good place to start. If you already have your FAFSA on file for, let's say, the fall and spring semester you're already in, any summer study abroad programs would get covered by that same FAFSA. Okay, if you're looking at next year, like say next fall or next spring or the following summer, that would get covered by the following school year's FAFSA. Depending on when you're reviewing this video, both may be open or only one would be open at the time. But again, you'll get to our contact information. You could always reach out to our offices directly if you want some help or guidance on that. But once you've submitted your FAFSA, the understandable next question is, well, now what? What's going to happen? What you would want to do is reach out to the UWM Center for International Education or the study abroad staff to discuss their programs available or program you may be interested in. Well, part of the process on the financial aid side is their staff will develop and send a budget over here to the financial aid office. What that means is kind of the overall cost of the program. They'll develop that. Now, if you're participating in a non-UWM study abroad program, like an external study abroad program through a private provider, part of the application process is you'll submit a survey about the cost of the program and the link to its website, and those numbers will be put together to create the budget for that particular program. Now, when we say budget, this can also be known as your cost of attendance or COA. In any given semester, that's a really important financial aid figure because that determines the maximum amount of financial aid the student could be awarded that semester between grants, scholarships, loans, etc. So think of it like the ceiling. You cannot exceed that amount of your cost of attendance for the semester. It also ties in when determining need-based aid as far as what's in your financial aid award. Of course, we all have financial need, but what we're talking about here is more of a financial aid term, where there's a calculation where we take the student aid index, that's the result of your FAFSA, subtract out your cost of attendance for your program or for the semester, and that resulting number would be the amount of need-based aid the student could receive for the semester. That's required for certain need-based programs, like we discussed briefly, the Wisconsin Study Abroad Grant, federal Pell Grant, Wisconsin grant funding, even some federal student loans, Stafford subsidized loans, which are the type of loan where the government will pay the interest for the student each month while they're in school. Those are all need-based forms of aid. So depending on the cost of their program and the result of the FAFSA, that can kind of calculate or determine some of the aid the student would qualify for. These are just some loan limits as of the time of this recording, so you're aware of them. What we see here are some columns going down. That left-hand column, dependent undergraduate students. Those would be for the students whose, let's say the FAFSA requires your parental information still on there. You can see the yearly amounts. Freshman or first year standing, $5,500 per year. Second year standing, $6,500, and it kind of goes up from there up to a ceiling of $7,500 per school year when somebody is third year or higher. So that's the yearly amount of loans a student would have available through the Department of Education, their federal direct loans. At the bottom, we see aggregate loan limits, basically the most the student could have borrowed at any one point in time. That's $31,000 for dependent students. Within that amount, both yearly and aggregate, you'll see there's a smaller number in subsidized loans. So for example, up top, that first year freshman standing, $5,500 overall for the year, up to $3,500 of that can be subsidized loans, which again are the loans the Department of Education is going to cover the interest for the student for each month. Independent students, very similar, as you can see, that's the right-hand column or middle column there. They just receive a bit more in funding per school year. And anybody who's a graduate or a professional degree student, it's $20,500 per year. And down below, we can see those higher aggregate loan limits amounts. Side note, there may be some changes to some of these amounts going into the 2026 to 27 award year. So that'd be starting fall of 2026 as far as aggregate loan amounts for graduate students. So if you are hearing this recording at a time after that and you have questions on your graduate aggregate, overall loan borrowing, feel free to reach out to our offices. We can help clarify that if you need it. Another common question is, okay, when studying abroad, am I going to qualify for more financial aid? And it's a bit of a yes or no question. Yes, in that budget or that cost of attendance, it can be a bit more than a normal semester depending on the program. So in theory, the student has more headroom or a higher ceiling of the limit on aid they could receive. It's also a no answer in that you don't automatically get more aid because the student's studying abroad, right? It increases the ceiling on the amount of aid a student could get, but they do still need to go throughout and apply for different grants and scholarships, which we're going to review here in a moment. Just so you know, most financial aid can be used for study abroad programs like federal Pell Grant, Wisconsin Grant, federal direct loans, everything we've been discussing to this point. There are a few exceptions. So if you're receiving a tuition waiver, like through a military benefit or an athletic scholarship, or if you're receiving one of the Wisconsin Tuition Promise Grant or the Milwaukee Tuition Promise Grant that covers your base tuition every semester, that will not work for a non-exchange program. We're going to talk about that in a moment here. Versus if you're on an exchange study abroad program, you can still receive those waivers or tuition promise grant funding. That may make a bit more sense when we look at some of those numbers here in a minute. And then there are some scholarships that would have some restrictions, especially if it's a private external scholarship. You may want to confirm with the provider, would they be willing to provide that scholarship funding for a study abroad program. As far as some of the aid that's out there, we did talk about these loans briefly. The direct Stafford loans, those are the loan limits we looked at a few moments ago. Those would be the loans taken out in the student's name. There are federal direct parent plus loans. This is a little different. This is for a dependent student, their parent can apply for a federal loan that the parent can then take out in their own name to cover any remaining costs for the year that the student's aid is not covering, which can include study abroad costs. Then there are still some direct graduate plus loan programs for current graduate borrowers. This is also getting phased out to some degree starting in the 2026 to 27 award year, depending on where you are in your studies. But that's another kind of supplemental direct loan that graduate students or professional students can apply for. And then there are private loans, visiting banks and credit unions for a private education loan. We do have a link here to our One-Stop website, which would have some really helpful breakdown on all of these, including some shop and compare options for private loans. And then for some of the grants that are out there, we already discussed, federal Pell Grant, Wisconsin grant funding, that's all eligible for study abroad programs. There is something called the Wisconsin Study Abroad Grant, which is a need-based form of aid. You do have to be a Wisconsin resident. You do have to be participating in a UW-Milwaukee sponsored study abroad program. So it can't be one of those external private study abroad providers. And you do have to be enrolled in and working on your first associate's or first bachelor's degree. Scholarships are out there for study abroad. That's often a good source to go of funding too. We have some links here that you could look through. I want to show you that first link, the UWM Study Abroad Scholarship website. I'm just going to switch over and let us take a look at that here together. This website is out on the UWM Center for International Education website. It just hones in on study abroad specific scholarships. So it's really helpful to help kind of narrow down what you're looking through. What we would see here is the UWM Panther Scholarship Portal, where you would just go out, log in with your regular UWM credentials and apply for any of our scholarship opportunities. It will, depending on the time of viewing, it will narrow down and have some filters showing scholarships that are eligible for study abroad programs or specific to study abroad programs. We did briefly talk about that Wisconsin Study Abroad grant a few moments back. Now, there is no separate application. This is good for informational purposes. There is no separate application. Once a student confirms their participation in a study abroad program, we just review them for eligibility and would package those funds for them. The dollar amounts are listed here. It's typically $1,000 for a semester, like in the fall and spring for a fall semester. A short-term program like, let's say, over the winterim break or over the summer, that's typically up to $900 for those programs. So this one, again, just informational, but as long as we have your FAFSA on file by the deadlines listed, then we would be able to package those funds for the student. And here are the deadlines we have to have a student's FAFSA on file for, depending on the term they're looking to study abroad. All of these you'd want to look through later and explore. If anybody, I would like to hone in on this scholarship called the Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship. This is provided through the U.S. Department of State. It's for Pell Grant recipients. So if you know in your aid package you have something called the federal Pell Grant, I highly encourage you to apply for this. It can be up to $5,000 for a semester or for a year-long program. So it's very helpful. They have their own website they'll go out to. You'd have to, of course, apply through. And then just scroll through the list as you can research this later. There are some provider-based scholarships. These are for those external private study abroad providers that we've mentioned once or twice already. Some of them, they're all listed here. They'll often have their own scholarship page where you could go out and apply for their own internal scholarships as well. There are some region-specific scholarships, and then as well as just some external scholarship database websites you may wish to review. You want to cast that net as wide as possible and apply for as many scholarships as you can. We always say, what the answer is if you don't apply, which is going to be a no. So you just need to get those applications out there and spend a little time on this page. We've briefly talked about the Wisconsin Study Abroad grant as far as the deadlines are listed here on when your FAFSA would need to be in and the different requirements for that grant. Side note, for those shorter term programs like the winterim, a student does have to be full-time the fall semester directly before that. And then if you're looking to use this grant for the summer, a student would also have to be full-time that spring semester directly before their study abroad program in the summer. And then also for summer, you do have to be enrolled in at least 6 credits by April 30th. Some of our summer study abroad programs are 6 credits, so that's fine. There are some that are only 3 credits. So in those cases, the student needs to qualify for this, they also have to enroll in another 3-credit course, be it online while they're studying abroad or on campus, maybe when they get back from their program or before they leave for their program. So just keep that requirement in mind as well. I wanted to briefly talk about maintaining financial aid eligibility regarding satisfactory academic progress, or SAP. So satisfactory academic progress is a Department of Education regulation where we have to calculate some numbers for a student at the end of each semester. Basically, the Department of Education wants students to be making progress towards their degree to continue remaining eligible for federal and state financial aid. So the way this comes down are when we run those grades every semester, a student has to be earning credit for 66.67% of all attempted credits. Attempted credits mean courses you take and pass, but let's say if the student took a course and didn't pass it, or they got a withdrawal or something like that, or an incomplete, that would all pull into those numbers. And then there's a maximum time frame limit where the government allows you to attempt basically 1.5 times the credits needed for a degree. So for example, a typical bachelor's degree would be roughly 120 credits to graduate. The Department of Education would allow a student to attempt up to 180 credits maximum. If a student starts bumping up against either of those limits, they do get some email notifications from our offices about nearing those limits or when they become ineligible. And if that does happen, then the student just needs to come talk to the financial aid advisors in the Student Financial Service Center to discuss what happened. We could have to see if there's an appealable reason to continue receiving aid through graduation. Now, why do I bring that up in the light of study abroad? Well, it's important when you get back from your study abroad program to go through the follow-up steps of getting those transcripts sent over to UWM as soon as possible, right? Because if let's say a student gets back and they miss something in that process, it looks like you attempted all these credits while you were studying abroad, but you didn't earn credit for any of them. And that obviously, as we just looked at, that hurts your SAP calculations. Especially as we get towards your senior year, sometimes that can cause a student to get near that time frame limit, something like that. So we just want to be mindful of that. If you're not sure where you're at with SAP calculations, or if you have any concerns, you'll have my contact information here shortly. You could always reach out to me directly and we could check that for you. And then as far as some deadlines, really push comes to shove, a student would need, this is not a good idea, but a student would need to get their FAFSA submitted at least 2 weeks before the end of the semester. But that's not going to be very good for you, because that means your go on the whole semester with this balance on your account at UWM for your study abroad program, so you're probably being charged finance fees. And then also, let's say if a student turns in their FAFSA near the end of the semester, sometimes the Department of Education flags it for additional information, right? We need to get tax returns turned in and somebody to review it. And before you know it, we can sneak past the end of the semester and the student doesn't get any aid and they're out of luck. So really just get this, that's worst case scenario. You want to get everything in way ahead of time, before you'd be leaving on your study abroad program. Another thing that's a little different are the 1-year study abroad fees post to your account. In a typical on-campus semester, you may see your fees ready to review ahead of time. Depending on how the study abroad office and the visiting school are invoicing or being invoiced by the visiting school, it may be a little closer to when you actually leave for your program that sometimes those fees show up on your account. Nothing to be alarmed about. It's just the business process can be a bit different there. And then also, regardless of when your program actually begins, keep in mind we can never disperse financial aid any sooner than 10 days before the start of the regular semester back here on campus. So if a student's program leaves, they have to catch their flight shortly before that 10-day time frame before, let's say, classes actually start here in the fall or the spring. You may need to make sure you've made some arrangements, to have purchased your airfare, et cetera, while we wait for your aid to come in. And then if you have any forms or verification that you would need help from our offices, right? You need a financial aid officer to sign off on something. This can happen through scholarship applications. Some embassies may want, a typed up award letter confirming how much aid the student's going to receive while they're visiting the country, that kind of thing. You can reach out to myself directly. Our email here, it's finaid-sa@uwm.edu. You can send those right over to myself here, Mike Medowis, in the Office of Financial Aid Administration. I would say just give us at least 7 to 10 business days before any deadlines on the forms, so we have time to get to the request and get it back to you, so you can turn it into whichever party you're needing to. Depending on the time of the semester, right, there can be a bottleneck of requests coming in, so give as much heads up time, at least 7 to 10 business days if possible. All right, so we briefly talked about budgets or the cost of attendance for a program. We do have those all listed out. I'll show you what that looks like here. Basically, there are different types of budgets. There are exchange programs. There are non-exchange or provider-based programs. And then there are some faculty-led programs, non-UWM, those external study abroad programs, even a few virtual programs are out there. We'll look at those budgets in a moment. Just keep in mind, these are estimates. So what would happen is when you receive your confirmation price in your acceptance email, the fee should never be more than that actual confirmation price as we get a little closer towards the start. This is a good figure to give you an estimate to go on for now ahead of time, but you will get a confirmation email with that confirmation price. Let's look at 1 or 2 of these budgets. I want you to see what this looks like here. So this is our program search website. Very helpful. You can filter by what term you're looking at, what country you'd like to go to. Do you want an exchange program or not? Let's look at the difference. I'm just going to briefly pick a program here near the top of the list, the Jew University Exchange. So these pages are helpful in that they show the application deadlines. You can see listed as of the date of this recording, it's leading up towards the spring 2027 term. But it'll give you some academic information, how many credits is the program, et cetera. If you ever have any questions on the details of the program, usually near the bottom here, there is a program advisor in the Study Abroad office or the Center for International Education listed. So if you have a question on the experience or what's housing going to look like, or academically, what am I studying, that's who you'd want to reach out to. Our office is here. The financial aid email I gave you would be more for funding estimates, or again, if you need questions with forms, filled out, that kind of thing. What I would like you to see though is near the top here, there's a program cost breakdown. And it talks about what's included in the cost of attendance, really good detailed information to run through. I'm just going to gloss over this a little bit and let us see a breakdown here. So we could see it's spring of 2027. We'd pick the student's residency. Let's say it's a Wisconsin resident. So it'll pull in what are called billable amounts. So these are the numbers that will show up on the student's account at UWM, like your tuition would in a normal semester. So for an exchange program, they're actually charged UWM tuition, base tuition. There are some UWM administrative fees for administering the study abroad program, some international student health insurance fees that get posted. So let's say for this program, the billable total would be about $5,408 on the student's account. And keep in mind, I wanted you to see this. This is an exchange program, so it does have regular UWM tuition. So if a student is receiving a tuition waiver or Wisconsin or Milwaukee tuition promise grant, that would help cover this base tuition for you. Okay. Below that, we do see non-billable amounts. These are nothing the student's going to get charged for, but you would want to plan ahead accordingly for these costs for external expenses like airfare, housing if you have to pay a housing contract to an outside provider for this program, a food budget, et cetera, books and supplies. So non-billable amounts, again, they're never going to post to your account. You're not getting charged for these, but we do factor them into the cost of attendance. So if a student's aid covers the billable amount, the student then gets a refund issued to them, which can be used to, pay for these kind of external costs. This one, the non-billable amounts, we'd estimate about $7,710. So the overall cost of attendance for that student, about $13,118 for that semester for this particular program. So let's look at a non-exchange program now. We'll go for one off the top of the list here, the European Study Center semester abroad in Strasbourg, France. And again, we'll scroll down, hone in on our program cost breakdown. And just to see some of the differences here. Now this program may have a different track, business track or politics track. There are Wisconsin residents. And then we'll pick the number of weeks, say for the business track. Now this program, as we'll see, it has a program expense listed, but it's not base tuition, right? That the exchange program gets. It's a separate, it'll show up as just study abroad fees on your account. For these non-exchange programs, the students, any tuition waivers or tuition promise grants would not help cover those fees in particular. It only goes for something actually labeled as UW-Milwaukee tuition on your account, which the exchange program have. These non-exchange programs like we're looking at now do not have that. So just keep those two main differences in mind. But as you can see, here's a set of the same figures with a different cost of attendance that we would set for that semester, that student semester. Here again, just some screenshots summarizing. You could scroll through looking at some sample differences for an exchange program. Again, a non-exchange program, very similar to what we just looked at. A faculty-led program, very similar, but it may have some faculty fees associated. When you look at your account later on, when the fees are posted, sometimes, again, depending on the type of program, you'll see different things listed on your account. So again, for an exchange program, you'll have that base UWM tuition and the fees we talked about. They may, the administrative fees and the insurance fees will often be labeled SA, study abroad fee, and an explanation of them. Non-exchange programs with just the program fees, they're usually labeled SA and then maybe the name of the program, something like that. So they don't show up in the same place or the same label as your regular tuition. It looks a little different. If you are participating in a non-UWM program, like through a private provider, there are just a small administrative fee posted and then your international student health insurance fee. What happens in those cases, it's a bit unique. The student would get their financial aid to come in, it would cover those smaller fees, and then the student gets a rather sizable refund sent to them for the semester. And you have to play middle person where you would take those funds, your refund, and pay your external private study abroad provider. So those non-UWM external programs, you do get your refund from UWM and pay them directly yourself. And then there are some virtual programs still out there. They may have just be labeled study abroad fees as well. We talked earlier about your confirmation email. So when you confirm your participation in a program, just keep in mind that once you do confirm, you're becoming financially liable for the program. So like in a typical semester, let's say in the spring, right? Spring's starting up and something happens, you have a family emergency and you have to drop all your spring classes. As long as you do that before classes start, UWM's policy right now, as of the recording of this video, is to refund your tuition for the semester. Study abroad program, sometimes that's not always the case. UW-Milwaukee may have already made some payments to the visiting school on your behalf. So even though the Center for International Education staff will try to get back as much as they can, sometimes the student can still have a balance on their account for the program, even if they weren't able to attend. So just keep that in mind. That's why it's just smart, like you're doing today, listening to this, make sure you know the lay of the land, how the costs will work, and what kind of aid eligibility you will have. There can be some late fees posted to account if a student has like a late application as well. Just keep that in mind. That can rarely come up. A few other forms and topics. So There's a federal regulation called FERPA, which protects your financial aid and academic records, kind of like how HIPAA would protect your healthcare records. So let's say if you have a significant other or family who's going to call in while you're out of the country to talk to the financial aid staff about what's going on with your funding, just so you know, even though we want to help, we cannot discuss any information unless you've gone out on pause and completed a consent release granting us permission to speak to such and such individual. Rarely, a student may want to sign up a power of attorney, someone who could act on their behalf while they're out of the country, signing documents, etc. These are optional. There's no specific due date, but just keep in mind some students do choose to go through those. And then if you have any notarization needs, through applications or for visa applications, there are some services offered in the university legal clinic, as well as sometimes there are notarization services at local banks and credit unions too. As far as other funding ideas, there's no wrong answer. Just check with, your department, maybe academic advisors, see if there are any scholarship opportunities they know of, any personal organizations you're a part of. So, regional groups or groups based on the ethnicity of the student or something along those lines. Anything you're involved in, a religious group, see if they have any scholarship fundings available. Some students do look at crowdfunding, putting out the call to family and friends a year ahead of time. I'm looking to study abroad next summer, and see if, aunts, uncles, and everybody could chip in a little bit, something like that. Again, be creative. If you want to discuss that further, there's an email here to contact the study abroad staff at overseas@uwm.edu, and they can talk that over more with you too if you'd like. And then lastly, just our contact information. So if you have direct financial aid questions, you can reach out to myself, Mike Madaus, at finaid-sa@uwm.edu. And if you have more study abroad questions, you'd want to contact the Center for International Education at overseas@uwm.edu. Otherwise, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day, and thank you for your attention. Stay in contact with us if you have any questions, and have a good rest of your day.